So this show is essentially really inspired by a scene from the movie The Others from 2001, starring Nicole Kidman, which follows the story of a woman and her two children, where the father and her husband go off to war. In World War I, they live in Jersey, the Isle of Man. And essentially, he leaves and we don't know how long he's been gone. They don't really have a house staff. They're just, they're on their own in this large manor. And then some hauntings start to happen in the house, like some generally spooky things. And then there's this one scene that I remember from when I was very little, because my mother showed me this when this came out. But there's this scene where she starts hearing noises up in the attic in the junk room, where all these pieces of furniture that used to be in more rooms of the house all these objects are under these dust covers, which are mostly pieces of fabric. So she goes into this room and she's hearing voices, and all these pieces of furniture, like, you could kind of see what's under them. You could kind of make out the shapes and the forms, but you can also make out that there's these voices like in and around this room. So she starts really freaking out and taking off the sheets from these pieces of furniture, kind of in a frenzy of like trying to figure out who's there, if anybody's hiding under one. Eventually the door behind her shuts, so she feels like whatever was in the room ran out, and she didn't get to find it while she was pulling the dust covers off of these pieces of furniture. So that scene had always stuck with me since then. In particular about the idea of like the objects or somebody hiding within the objects or next to them, or using these dust covers to also obscure themselves, or like, again, like it being like a ghost and it not necessarily being hidden under these sheets. But then also specifically about the vision of like these objects kind of taking on these forms with the sheets, and the idea of like ghosts and this image of like, somebody shrouded in a sheet. So in thinking about this scene in relation to my own sculpture and my own kind of interest in really filmic sequences, and that, like, the reality of like, just having been obsessed, like I love these action-packed scenes in horror movies where like the action is happening at a mile a minute and it's almost the climax of, something happening, and how I like to think about when I make installations about them being like these climactic things that you kind of walk through. And I do all my own exhibition design for the most part, so I'm like creating a situation where you encounter the works on the level that I want you to encounter with them, almost in a very like domineering way, but I do this, on purpose, because that is kind of my personality. For this show, I wanted to create this scene through my aesthetic vocabulary and through what I could do. Additionally, there is one collaboration in the show where I have reached out to someone that I'm a huge fan of and have been for about a decade, James Leland Kirby, wonderful musician, to produce a sound piece that will play in the room and kind of emanate either out of different objects or out of the room in general, that will kind of create like a filmic score almost for the installation that will kind of play on loop, but you won't really be able to notice. I want people to spend a lot of time in this room or run out immediately because it's too much. So in addition to that, I will create sculptures that I will shroud with these sheets to kind of look like what these objects look like in the movie. But then I will also install a row of paintings in the space along a large bar at the highest level that I can in the gallery, and it's one of the shorter galleries in the museum, which I also love because I can kind of create this claustrophobic effect almost with the amount of work and the sound. There will be very low lighting to kind of look like a room in kind of disuse. I also want people to be able to walk in and kind of not really understand if there's a show going on, or if something's being like moved out, or like, why are we on this floor? Overall, I think using these different components of what I can really do, I can create the idea of this scene in the eyes of, even for people that haven't seen the movie, they'll watch it and be like, that kind of reminds me of an exhibition that I saw. And I could kind of pay a true homage to it. Because above everything, I am a bit of a fanboy of of these, movies and this genre of the Gothic. So the events and installations in the basement will be all part of basically one show along with the attic. So there will be a performance a week before and a week after the exhibition opens and closes respectively, and that will be called Basement Scene, and that is a reference to a song by the band Deer Hunter. The performance in the basement scene will essentially consist of, we'll start with an intermission by Leland James Kirby that will play while people get situated in the room, because it will essentially divide the basement into two halves: the auditorium, the glass divider, and Le Foyer. I will do essentially a 30-minute DJ set while performers create the sculptures in the stands of the museum. In this process, the sculptures will be made kind of one at a time. So after the 30-minute set, the doors will open of the auditorium. There might be some more music from James Leland Kirby, and then two DJs, yet to be revealed, will essentially do proper like rave sets for about 3 to 4 hours in the basement. So it will be two different rooms of a club, and then people will kind of clear the room. But like at any ending night at a club, you're kind of looking for a way to stay, you're looking for the green room, you're looking for the talent, you want a few more minutes of whatever you had. So at the end of the night, then there will be some documentation, but that performance is over, Basement Scene is over. Then the auditorium will be closed, but the rave lights, because there will be like a proper setup for like a club, will be on. The sculptures will stay in the place, and then there's an installation for about 2 to 3 days, and that is called Locked Club. So people will be able to go down in the basement and see the remnants of this party, you know, what it looks like when it's the end of a night and you've been cleared out. Super eerie, people just kind of walking in there also like, what's going on? So after the first Basement Scene performance and Locked Club installation, all the objects will be brought upstairs. I'll cover them in sheets. That will be attic. Then again, a week after the show closes will be Basement Scene 2024 and Locked Club 2024. And I want to just show that through my aesthetic vocabulary, which is also interested in the Gothic and these things that happen, but then also interested in these hallucinatory states that happen in this like very rushed action that is filmic. I think what happens in like clubs and, you know, these large events is like connected to also these, you know, things that film directors try and create for you also in the cinema through these actions that kind of like coalesce and coalesce and coalesce and coalesce. It's like something's being summoned, whether it's your reaction to the media or the right note or the right song does for you like at 4 a.m. somewhere. So I'm excited to basically have this like crazy like rave installation and then also like a very scary attic thing. And then as a whole, it's like this one exhibition that allows the work that I make to also be cannibalized by the museum, but then kind of recannibalize itself and then exit on this like high note and then kind of disappear. I absolutely do, in like the least like presumptuous terms possible. I think that there's definitely this connection with thinking about this term that I actually took a class in college with this term. It's called creative license and nonfiction, and it's about telling stories about subjects, like usually it's in journalism, but people have also used it to kind of like talk about their lives, even like this kind of autofiction that people tend to write now, where you kind of change some dimensions of the truth to kind of highlight deeper truths to make these kind of fantastical portions of what you're trying to communicate like very visible. You kind of have to almost like not shock people, but you have to get their attention to like listen to these deeper truths, and sometimes it involves like an inverting of like the facts. And I think Mike Kelly and a lot of his work, especially, I guess I'm thinking about these large school complex works where he is like trying to remember these school buildings and these traumas that potentially happened to him while he's thinking about specifically all these cases in the United States of basically false memories that came up through therapy and false memories of like mostly like child abuse and all these connections that he had to that in his work, where he was creating these like narratives where he was like trying to reflect on all these rash of basically like discussions of like sex abuse and different things that were going on in the United States that were all coming about when basically more people started to get this like really specific kind of therapy that was being purported at the time. Also, especially his work concerning all these like satanic cabal cults in the United States and how the therapy was also connected to like exposing a lot of those. And he's thinking about his own childhood. He's trying to present it as like, I could be like a test case for all these things that are going on right now, all this like kind of mass hysteria over like the satanic panic, over a lot of things happening in the States at the time. But again, he was using, you know, his own references, his own like school complex, like remembrances of like the architecture of like different schools that he went to make these, you know, works that were basically addressing concerns in the United States at the time that he was really reflecting on. You know, I'm obsessed with this like media that I consumed as a child that was, you know, horror movies that my mom was just showing me like en masse, but then also like other media, you know, I was watching a lot of like reality television that I probably shouldn't have been watching that, you know, covered like a lot of really intense things happening in the United States. My own mom, her job for the police department in Los Angeles was registering sex and drug offenders for the LAPD, and she would tell me about things that were happening in Los Angeles. And then at the same time, she was showing me these movies, I think, to also kind of freak me out. She was just like, there are bad people out there are bad things out there, but that's what's so rich about Kelly's work, is that there is this large void that, you know, I'm barely tapping into through just like watching interviews and reading other like kind of scholarly writing on his work.